All right, for those attending remotely, we'll get started here in just a moment. All right, good evening. My name is David Gibson. I'm the city manager for the city of Clayton, and welcome to Clayton City Hall. This is our first neighborhood level meeting that we've held for the Concordia Wash U project. A lot of familiar faces here. I know that a lot of you attended the previous session that we had at Clayton High School. And for those that weren't, hopefully you were able to find the Engage Clayton website where you can find the presentation slides that were utilized at the first meeting, along with a narrative over the top of those presentation slides to add some context there. So as information is created during this effort, all of that will be added to engageclayton.com. So I encourage everybody to utilize that site. There's also an area there where you can sign up for notifications when information is added. You can also add comments along the way, and all of those comments are recorded and will be taken into consideration as well. We are recording tonight's meeting, and we will record the other neighborhood meetings that we'll be having later this week. And again, this meeting tonight is for Hillcrest. So if you're from another neighborhood, feel free to ask those questions. But what we're really interested to hear from is the neighborhood on the north side of the project, because every side of the project is going to have a different set of concerns. And that's the reason for having these neighborhood level meetings. We've scheduled this for an hour and 15 minutes total. We're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes, just kind of a really brief project overview. So not going through everything that we've put out there previously, and then an hour of discussion. So we want to hear your feedback, your comments, your concerns, so that as we go through this process and build an overlay district for the western side of the Concordia property there, that we're taking all of that into account and we can mitigate those concerns as we go. So with us tonight, we do have Concordia University or Concordia Seminary and Washington University representatives, some at the table here, some in the back. So lots of folks around that can answer questions, and everybody will be taking notes. So that's the purpose of the meeting tonight. So I will go through a really brief overview of zoning again. So I talked about this in the larger meeting, and I just want to remind everyone what zoning is intended to do. And it's to regulate three things: use, intensity, and bulk. So again, the use of the property is, how is it being utilized? Is it retail? Is it commercial? Is it an educational institution? Is it housing? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about use. And that's one of the components that we regulate through zoning. Second is intensity. So does it generate noise? Does it generate light? What kind of traffic does it generate? What kind of parking requirements are going to be required there? How intense is that use? And then finally, the bulk of the use. And when we're talking about bulk, we're talking about the physical structures. So how much of the actual site or the land is it taking up? What are the setbacks? How far does the structure need to be from the property line? How tall is the structure? So when we're talking about bulk regulations, that's what we're getting into there. So that's what zoning seeks to do, and that's what we regulate throughout our code when we put zoning regulations in place. The map that you see on the screen, you can see that it's basically all yellow, and that's because everything in that area is zoned R2, which is single family residential, and that includes the South 40 campus, Fontbonne, and Concordia Seminary. And I brought it up in the larger meeting. It is unusual to regulate educational institutions through single family zoning. And that's how the city's done it for quite some time. So that's why we felt this was a good opportunity to have a conversation with the community about regulating this the way you typically see it in communities that have educational institutions, which is tailoring those particular districts so that the institutions and the neighborhoods have an interface that, you have a balance there that works for the institutions, but also maintains the character of the neighborhoods and maintains that quality of life. So what we do currently, anytime Concordia Seminary or Washington University wants to build something, is we go through a process to issue a conditional use permit. And a lot of you are probably familiar with this with past projects, but anytime they want to build something, they apply for a conditional use permit. And what we're looking to do in that particular case is mitigate any potential nuisances on the site. So again, let's think about noise, lighting, parking. I know density has been a big part of the conversations in the past, as you've talked about residence halls and dorms on the Washington University property. But conditional use permits is how that's typically regulated here, or has been in the past. One of the issues with that, of course, is they're all one-off zoning decisions. So what we have downstairs is just a stack of files with conditional use permits, each one of those with a different set of regulations for that particular building as it was constructed. And again, what we want to look at is a more cohesive approach to development on that site. And the way we accomplish that in many areas throughout the city right now is through overlay districts. And that's what we're going to spend quite a bit of time tonight talking about. And so when you establish an overlay district, those regulations are going to supersede the zoning district that's there right now. So if you put an overlay in place, for instance, on the South 40, that's going to supersede the single family residential requirements for that piece of property. You are building a custom zoning district for that particular use. Again, cohesive development, that's what we're after. So when you look at that second bullet point there, when we talk about building the box, let's build the framework. And if you build the framework right, the box around that piece of property, you know, how many dorms they have or where they're at won't matter as much if you build your buffers right, if you have good parking standards in place, if you put all those regulations in up front, then everybody can get comfortable with what can ultimately be built there. And so that's the third bullet point, which is the predictability part. So everybody knows the rules going into a conversation about what's going to be built. The residents know, the institutions know, the city knows, and it's not this constant negotiation for each building that's going to be built. Everybody knows exactly what the rules are. And that's the end goal for what we're trying to do here. We don't want residents feeling like every time you get a public hearing notice, you have to go to City Hall and play defense to stop something horrible from happening on an adjacent property that's going to change the character of the neighborhood. Let's work everything out up front so that everyone can be comfortable with it. So this is really, again, intended to be a dialogue between the city, the institution, and the neighborhood. Preserving neighborhood character and quality of life. Again, that's our number one concern. That is the top priority here. And then we are really looking at three primary resident concerns whenever any kind of land use application or zoning conversation is being had. And that's residents, if something's happening adjacent to them, typically don't want to see it, they don't want to hear it, and they don't want traffic or parking in their neighborhoods. And that's 95% of the zoning discussions that you see happen during public hearings. And that's, again, what we're trying to take into account as we build these overlays. So don't want to see it. Those are things like building heights, transition zones or buffers, you know, landscape buffers between commercial properties and residential properties, lighting, don't want to hear it. So if there's going to be loudspeakers, decibel limits, parking lot and garage locations on the property, those all can have an impact on noise. And then finally, and we heard a lot about this during that first public meeting, traffic and parking in neighborhoods, making sure that we have proper access points, that the road system can handle what's being proposed, and that finally there's convenient on-site parking so that people don't park in adjacent neighborhoods to walk to whatever it is they want to utilize. So those are the base parameters that we're working with. And so here are the two areas again. The proposed South 40 campus overlay district, which is up here, bounded by Forsyth on the north, Wydown on the south, and then Big Bend over here on the west. And then the Big Bend overlay district, which is bound by Big Bend on the west. And then you can see the Concordia Seminary property here. So I will turn it over to Concordia Seminary and Mike Lewis, and he's going to walk through a few slides here. We have two hands up. We can take a really brief question if you have a question about zoning right now. If it's about a specific zoning element related to the project, it'd probably be best if we wait until we get through the slides here. Can you pull that up on? See who we got. Here we go. Pauline?
We can't see the slides. They're not advancing if we're on.
Oh,
Zoom.
is it not? Which one of these is it on? How about now?
Yes, that's
Okay,
better.
good. All right. Thank you very much. We apologize for that. The slides I just walked through as far as zoning is concerned are the same exact slides that we used previously, and you can also find that again on the Engage Clayton website. So I apologize for that oversight. I'll turn it over to Concordia and they will walk through their portion of the project. which is a conditional use permit because it's just a one-off application that they have on their property.
Thank you, David. This is the existing Concordia Seminary property. It is about 72 acres. This is the way it looks today. Big Bend on the west, DeMun on the east. What we're trying to do, excuse me, at Concordia Seminary is to address a couple of issues. One of them is housing, married student housing and single student housing. And the second thing that we're trying to do is create better community on our campus. So you can see all of the housing on the western part of the campus. It's about 25 years old. It is in poor condition for a number of reasons. And we have a few choices. One of them is to invest significantly in that property, or another would be to move it. And what we're intending to do is to move that housing significantly east, closer to the chapel, which is in the center of this image. Second thing that we have is single student housing. Our single students are still living in 1920s dormitories. And so we intend to move that single student housing further west, again, close to the chapel. The second issue that we're dealing with is community. So we're trying to create more community. Those two moves will allow us to let single students and married students be closer together. It lets them be closer to the faculty, which are the homes that are in the north and central part of this image. It puts people closer to the core of the campus where we have classes and offices, and the chapel, which is the center of our campus. So our intention is to really improve our housing and to get a little bit smaller physically on our campus so that we create better community. Nope. All right. So this is what we intend to build around the chapel now. There's a roadway that right now goes to the west. We intend to direct all traffic all the way around this housing project, but there are three apartment buildings. You'll notice to the west, southwest, and northwest of the chapel. Those are 24-unit multifamily buildings. There are 9 townhomes directly north of the chapel. And there's a 75-unit single person apartment directly to the south of the chapel. So this is the housing that we intend to build to replace the existing housing right now. There's also in the far southwest corner of that image a parking deck. And you may notice that there's one of the buildings will be torn down. That's directly south of the chapel where the 75-unit apartment building is now. We intend to reclaim about 25,000 square feet of campus space right now, historic campus space just east of the chapel, and relocate offices there. What we're going to end up with is eliminating the married student housing and replacing it with more married student housing. That's about the same count of units and beds. And for the single students, we can house about 75 right now. So we would be replacing that with another 75. Parking increases by just over 20 spaces. We're losing a lot of the parking out in what we call the woods, married student housing right now. Replace it with a parking deck. This next slide is simply a side-by-side. It shows what this area looks like today with the driveway and no housing, and then over on the right-hand side, it shows what all of the new housing would look like. Again, on the website, there are a number of pictures that show this project from ground level. I've only kept one here to show to you next, and it will be from the perspective of this P. This is a parking deck. It's a 2-story parking deck, and I wanted to show you an image from that vantage point. There's a natural change in grade right here where you would drive onto this parking deck on the top level at grade, and then down you would enter on the lower level also at grade right here. So this is a very unobtrusive parking structure. And then ultimately what the campus would look like, and you'll see this image later on in Washington University's presentation, is the same 72-acre campus. The eastern part is left alone, this Demond frontage. You see the housing here with the parking structure, and then over on the western portion of the campus is Washington University's development that they will discuss.
Tom's going first. Is that,
In advance one.
yeah, it's beyond logical skills. So I'm Mary.
Hey, oh, go ahead, Mary, sorry.
Yeah, let me just, oh, sorry.
I'm Mary Campbell. I run real estate for Washington University. I'll just say that when Concordia put their plan together, they approached us about utilizing this western portion of their campus. We were really excited about the opportunity. We saw that we could potentially enhance portions of our own campus by looking at relocating athletic facilities and fields down to Concordia's campus. So that is in a nutshell what we're looking at through this overlay tool that David's described. And I'm going to first ask Tom Kirk, who's one of our consultants who's working specifically on the overlay for Concordia, to just quickly walk you through what you might see through this overlay.
Yeah, thanks, Mary, and good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. Just wanted to start by reorienting everyone here, looking down at the Washington University main campus, the Danforth campus, and then that South 40 piece just below that. And that's, as Mary noted, kind of where some athletics fields are and their housing. So what's interesting about this conversation with Concordia and what you've just heard is, next slide, is this idea that, you know, when they move their housing over and it frees up that parcel, next slide, there's this interesting opportunity to rethink that South 40, but also think about what is already happening on that parcel currently. You saw there's some tennis courts and there's a field house and there's actually a field up there, is to think of that as a overlay district that would primarily be for recreation and athletics. So before we zoom in on these, we just wanted to also talk about some other kind of overarching principles that are at play here. So if we go to the next slide. You know, right now at that upper parcel, the South 40, there we're looking at the access there. And then, of course, when you look down at the Big Bend overlay district next to Concordia, there's no access because it's Concordia's property right now. So we want to think about how we can activate both of these parcels, how to connect them to make them, you know, for student engagement and visitor engagement, and how we're going to do that. So right now, you know, we're looking at the pedestrian access, the vehicle access, bicycle access, and how to stitch these two together really, and how to use Big Bend as the connector. And of course, we've been talking to Fompon as well about all this, but if you go to the next slide, really want to make sure that there's connectivity from the main campus through the South 40 down to the Big Bend overlay for pedestrians and bicycles, of course. I mean, this is all about an active wellness kind of, you know, lifestyle. But we will need car access. So you see there is some blue to access. And if you look, you can see we're showing that right across from the Oak Park entry. We just think that's a logical place for now. These early discussions to do that, to have that vehicle access. So again, just sort of looking at how to activate these two parcels and make them, you know, even though they're not physically contiguous, make them sort of connected. So to zoom in a little bit, and we saw, you know, in Concordia's presentation, this side of the parcel, and you can see the housing and the parking to the top of the page. But really, this is the beginning of the box, right? So this is the beginning of the process we want to go through with you. Is, you know, this is the definition, right, of this property. So you can see some of those buffers here, the property lines and the setbacks. And if we go to the next, I think, you know, what we're just starting to think about and is, you know, protecting those buffers, of course, thinking of those setbacks, thinking about where there are no buffers, and we want to make sure there are some. So you can see the darker green is where we would want to propose some definitely beefing up of the buffers there. You see that, the north and the south, and then sort of keeping the playing fields and buildings that support them kind of more central to the overlay district. And I'll hand it off to Ross to talk about the South 40.
Thanks, Tom. My name is Ross Welch. I'm an architect with Trivers. We're a local architecture and urban design firm here in St. Louis, to talk along the same lines about the ideas for the South 40. Again, this is the existing conditions diagram. As David mentioned, just identifying what the current box is and where the current buffers are. South 40 is between Forsyth to the north and Wydown to the south, with Big Bend to the west, and then some shared property lines to the east. We took out the animation, so just looking quickly at the still images to give the sense of what the existing conditions from the street are. And the intent with anything that would happen with the overlay district is to maintain that experience from the street. This is, again, kind of a napkin sketch about what could potentially be facilitated on the South 40. But most importantly today, just identifying that those buffers around the perimeter of the property are intended to be maintained similar to what they are today, and strengthen those buffers around the perimeter to maintain that experience. The pink dots is really just diagrammatic about where circulation could occur, and you can see that opportunity to develop the circulation pattern from the northeast, closer from the Danforth campus, and then kind of shifting that circulation down towards the southwest to line up with the overall region neighborhood diagram that Tom shared about ways to access the Big Bend overlay district. David's going to wrap up with a couple thoughts.
Okay, so this is a little bit of recap again from the larger meeting we had, just so everyone understands this process. So we are at step one still, where we're gathering input. These neighborhood level meetings are going to be really important for us. And then we'll refine everything and develop those specific overlay district provisions. And once those are put together, we'll share those with everyone and get further comments on them. But the Board of Aldermen, in order to put all this in place, the Board of Aldermen would have to approve what's called a text amendment and basically establish those overlay district regulations within our zoning code. In order to do that, a recommendation has to be made by the Plan Commission before the Board of Aldermen can actually consider it, but we would have public hearings at both the Plan Commission and at the Board of Aldermen on those particular overlays. Once those overlays are established in text within the code itself, then you have to apply those overlays to actual properties in the city. So that's when you would go to drop it over the South 40 and also over the Big Bend overlay district as it's shown on the maps there. Same process to do that. So there would be a public hearing at the Plan Commission. They would make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen. The Board of Aldermen would hold a public hearing on it and then ultimately have the vote whether or not to approve it and put it in place. So those are the next steps. Concordia's is a little bit simpler. Like I said, it's a conditional use permit. So it's just a one-off application that they would need to make. We don't need to put anything new in our municipal code or anything else. There would be a public hearing for that at the Board of Aldermen that would also require a recommendation from the Plan Commission. And those things we envision would probably happen concurrently just because the projects are really tied together. So those are the next steps. And again, the intent today is to have a dialogue with the neighborhood and really focus from your particular angle. So Hillcrest, looking at this site, our questions are for you. I know we have questions here, but what are those primary concerns? What do we need to be taking into consideration as we build out these districts? And so I'll just open it up. We do have our design team here, and then also Tom Kirk is online, part of WashU's design team, and we want to get your feedback. So we do have all of the slides that we presented tonight, obviously, but also the slides that were used previously, which had a whole lot more as far as drawings and angles and different things. So if there's any specific perspective that you want to view things from as we have this conversation, we can pull those up and talk about it, look at the same thing at the same time. So with that, we've got a podium over here. I'll go ahead and turn on that mic if anybody wants to step up and ask the first question. You're welcome to do so. If you're at home participating on Zoom, there is a feature that says raise hand on your screen there. And if you hit the raise hand button, then we will see that here. We'll call on you, and then you're free to ask your question at that point. So we will open it up.
Hi, I'm Hillary Anger Elfenbein, 106 Aberdeen, 15-year employee of WashU. I'm a very devoted employee, 10-year homeowner in Clayton, and 3-year dog walker in the Concordia Seminary, which is the best neighbor anyone could hope for. What I wanted to say, and I think I might speak for a number of people in the room, the chatter after that meeting at the high school and just on the streets, a lot of it is about Dartford access. And Julie Flory, a close colleague, I think the words I used when I talked to her about it was, I said, I think that having any vehicular access through Dartford would open up Dante's Inferno's rings of hell. Because if you lived and you know, we all live in that neighborhood, there's parking on both sides, and there it is basically a one-lane road. When people come from the other direction, you politely move over to the side to let other people squeeze by. The idea that there would be vehicular access would take parking away from the residents, or it would make driving there, you know, really unsafe. Because, you know, we're neighbors, so we do pull over for each other, but it's really it would not be able to, it would have no carrying capacity for vehicles. So I'm just curious what kind of assurances we could have for this district not to allow that access. And something I'm hearing differently from the high school meeting than today. I was under the impression in the high school meeting that none of it would be conditional use permits, that there would be 2 different overlay districts that would have basically no further ability to restrict what could happen next. And so I'm just trying to understand, to me, they're very different in the sense that the South 40, it abuts property WashU owns. I don't think really a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that, because the neighbors who are affected are the people who own the property. Whereas the Concordia district is very different, because it abuts lots of residences, really 3 different neighborhoods. And so I'm just curious, you know, you were speaking at the last meeting about how important it is to have one unified plan. I'm just curious whether there can be a unified single-use permit for Concordia that's very clear that Dartford vehicle access is just not permitted, or if it is a district, whether it can be just very clear. Because I think that, you know, again, Dante's Rings of Hell, it would be very, very problematic to have any vehicles access through Dartford. Thank you.
And we can, in those regulations, dictate where those access points are. So if that's something we want to do, we could say that vehicular access through Dartford would be prohibited in that particular district.
And from our perspective, you know, we're still very early. We don't have the site plan yet. I mean, having that feedback and hearing from more people who feel the same way is really important to us, because we have a lot of flexibility on the north border of our site. It could be fenced off. It could be, you know, I haven't walked through there in a while, but bollards, and so you could allow emergency vehicle access or not. I don't think it's, you know, I think it's a valid point, and I think it's that's why we're here. If it's very important, there's no reason we can't plan for that.
Hello, my name is Karen Branding. I'm a homeowner in Whiteown Terrace. And I'm here, I'm also a trustee of the Whiteown Terrace Association. So I have a comment that I personally care about. And I also want to represent one of the voices of our community that passed along some feedback. So in terms of the South 40 overlay, thousands of people walk, run, push their strollers up and down Whiteown every week. I don't know how many thousands, but it's a lot. It's a very safe street, and there are no real access points from the South 40 onto Whiteown at that point. First Congregational parking lot, which I think really is a WashU parking lot, safe for about 7 spots up against the church. There is a gate there that I would imagine, I think a couple of times a year for move in and move out of the dorms, you open that, but otherwise that's closed. So that makes for a very safe boulevard which is probably one of the signature boulevards for walking in certainly Midtown, if not St. Louis County. So I know from, or I see from the design that it looks like perhaps some of the older dormitories will go and you'll create greenway and can't remember how you described it, but greenway and fields down to Wydown. So I would fully expect that our city council make sure that there isn't any safety impact on Wydown in terms of adding any curb cuts or opening that gate that would disrupt the safety on Wydown. I think that's imperative for all of us who use that every day. That's my personal concern. The other comment I want to pass on, and I'm not an expert here, but I feel as a trustee, I'm obliged to pass it on. So one of our residents was commenting that I guess it was back in 2018, there was discussion about the building coverage of the South 40 and that it was approaching 50%, which is more than the 33% building coverage limit that's permitted in the Clayton R2 zoning district. So as the South 40 becomes reimagined, I think it's important for our Board of Aldermen and our city to be in line with what the current guidelines and standards are. And if not, we need really clear communication about how that might change. So that's my representation of my neighbor. And my personal overlay on that is that I would also, as a longtime homeowner in that area, fully entrust our Board of Aldermen and our city government to ensure that there weren't any high rises built, that the current height restrictions would apply so that it doesn't change the overall character and density of that part of our beautiful Clayton neighborhood. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you for the comments.
Hi, I'm Max Ramsey. I live at 29 Dartford, which is right up at the Wydown end. Third house in, depending on where you start to count. For many years, I have, after a near accident coming out of Dartford onto Wydown because of parking on Wydown at school access times. And now they have band competitions. They have park and recreation sports, which my kids did that. I'm not complaining. But that corner at certain times of the day is really crowded. The cars back up on Dartford to basically my house. Am I complaining? No, I'm just saying there's a real crunch there. There's a crunch there on Saturday mornings with kids' sports. And then when Wydown rents the building to competitions, just like when Fontbine has competitions in their big obnoxious 3-story building 20 feet from Bill's house. It's noisy, but on Dartford, I just don't want to see a lot more congestion. And I think I would like to be reassured. I know the South 40 is, I remember I used to do a lot of walking on South 40 with my dog. Now you can't, well, you can get in there, but access is pretty restricted. Now I walk on Concordia with my dog. And bless them. But I just don't want to see Dartford become the regular way from students to walk to the overlay district there. And As others said, there's really very little parking there and hey, I'm late for my game. I got to get in my car, drive down there, park on Dartford and run right across. I hope that all traffic is closed at the end of Dartford like it is now. If not, I'll be yelling. Nobody will listen, but I'll yell. The fencing, in essence, that you have on the South 40, it would be nice if we could just, I was a college student. And we could discourage college students from coming down Dartford. We've had, periodically, I don't know if they were going to CBC or going to fields at Concordia, but we've had sport teams walk up and down. They didn't create a problem. It's fine. But I just wouldn't want to see a whole lot of extra traffic there. And I certainly would not want to see Demon opened up just to protect our neighborhood. And since you're doing these plans, I hope as city manager, you drive up the service drive for Fontbonne. And that would be my thing to anybody else. Don't let them border like that. I've got a parking lot 15 feet in back of my house. They're putting dorms into some of the offices. I didn't protest because I didn't think it would do any good. And they've got that gymnasium and whatever. It's just, I think, inappropriate bordering. It's already there. I'm living with it. I've been there for 39 years. So I just would not like to see some of my other Clayton residents have that kind of bordering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Katzman. I live on 3 Dartford. I'd like to second Max's comment and Hillary's as well. My question is about the overlay district, and will we have like specific details on what this overlay district will look like before it's voted on? Or it's like, we'll vote on the overlay district and it's like, good luck, WashU, let's do what you want with it.
No, you'll see it in advance.
Okay, and when is there a time frame for this, or is we looking at it?
We want to get through
week, months, years?
So we want to get through the neighborhood level meetings so we can establish what those standards are and sit down and say, for instance, access points or buffers that we need to make sure that we build these things into that overlay district.
And the 15-foot buffer seems kind of small. It's kind of like a free throw.
I think the 15 is the existing setback on.
That's
there.
the existing setback to,
I would have to go. Ross, was that your slide?
Big Bend. So I live very close to
You're talking
the
about
end of
this,
Dartford.
you're talking about this 15 here.
Exactly.
That's the existing setback on the property. That's the existing regulation for a building setback
Got it.
at that location. And so, and that's why when you look at some of these, again, I mean, these are really rough, but when you see that shaded green all the way around these properties, I think there is recognition on everybody's part here that the buffers are going to be very, very important.
So before the city of Clayton votes on this, we'll have a specific plan of exactly where the fields will be, exactly what the details about Dartford and whether it will be closed or open, that will all be we will all know that before it's voted on or not?
I don't know that you'll know the exact location of all the fields. What you would know is how far those fields would need to be located from a property line.
Okay.
What kind of transition zones or buffers or landscaping would be required there? If there are going to be lights, how tall can those light standards be? How much light
Perfect.
can they actually put out? And so when we get to talking about the regulatory framework, that's why we want to have these conversations and try to mitigate all of those concerns when we write it, so that when we get those specific proposals, everybody in this room, everybody in the community and the institution knows exactly what the rules are going to be when those proposals come forward. And so once that overlay district has been developed, we'll certainly share that with everyone. We'll have conversations about that. And then again, before it's voted on at the Plan Commission and the Board of Aldermen, there will be public hearings there. So lots of opportunities to comment on the regulations once they're all put together.
Great, thank you. And last question, is there any financial benefit to the city of Clayton for any of this or just
all. I
good
mean, we want to
neighbor?
make sure that we're regulating these uses in a
Right.
responsible manner, and that's why we're having this conversation. When we're talking about developments of this size phased over this long a period of time, we just wanted to make sure that we do all this right, and this seemed like a great opportunity to have the conversation and see if we could build it where it works for everyone.
Great. Thanks, David.
You bet.
I would just like to add one comment. We're now hearing a lot about Dartford, and it's actually really great to hear just the nuances also about what a complex, not complex issue, what a complex problem it could be. Part of our thought is that if you see on the drawing now is to try and guide pedestrian traffic through the South 40 up to Big Bend. So that and try and make a really enhanced Big Bend ped and pedestrian and bike access down Big Bend to the site. So we're trying to direct traffic there and not to Dartford. So if you've got any comments on that aspect too, just in the course of asking your questions, would love to hear it.
My name is Ian Hageman. I live at 10 Aberdeen. I'm also a trustee for Hillcrest, although I'm speaking as a private citizen. I also am a dean at the medical school and support collaboration, and I like open doors and open gates in general. That's kind of been our approach in Hillcrest too. I agree with everything that's been said. I think that this Dartford issue is the key issue. And so I think we need to keep talking about it. When I see the map that's currently displayed, I don't see those bright lines that are drawn. I see that exit from the South 40 at Ellenwood, and then the straight shot down University and along Dartford to the place that you can go into the proposed district. Kind of reminds me of a phrase that one of our neighbors offered, said, if you're designing a college campus, everyone's heard this, don't build paths, let the students walk around for 6 months. Wherever they walk, that's where you put the path. So it would be really essential, I think, to envision just what those Big Bend improvements could be so that we could understand how appealing they're going to be. Because asking students who just came from English class to go the long way around to a street where people are driving 40 miles an hour is going to be a really tough sell. And I wouldn't personally support closing any of those gates and accesses because you're going to end up with a fortress. I actually liked it better when the South 40 was open, which it used to be 20 years ago. And then I'll just close with a question that I wanted to ask earlier. The conditional use permits, this is naive, but are they conditional on something?
It's a great question. So what that means is a conditional use permit is actually permitted in that zoning district. When we say conditional, it means that the Board of Aldermen can add conditions to the approval to mitigate any potential nuisances that use may create. So again, the use is permitted, but we all recognize with a conditional use that there's the potential that there's going to be some sort of nuisance. We can add conditions to mitigate it, and that's where that conditional part comes from. And one thing I would point out really quickly, on the blue line here that you see, you had mentioned the access points from Ellenwood and Cecil. That's actually the access at Wallace Drive that's existing right now. So don't envision any new access points through any neighborhoods there.
Great. Yeah, thanks, David. I'm Stan Mulvihill. I'm a trustee of Hillcrest. Number of our folks are here tonight and have already spoken, so I won't mention I don't work for WashU, but it's one of the reasons I moved here 33 years ago was to have that institution nearby. And also Concordia has been very much a part of it. So it's a great part of our neighborhood, and it looks like it will continue to be. I think a lot of the questions sometimes get very specific about Dartford, and we worked hard to keep that closed when we dedicated that street to Clayton. That was a very intentional thing we did. DeMond closed many years before with Captain School, and we have kept the gates open at Skinker in order to try to regulate, but also maintain an open environment. We believe when we shut off things, it tends to be bad on the other side of that gate. So our impulse is to try to have things open. So the occasional student coming through or what have you is fine. that's worked out really well. But everybody here is, I think, weighed in pretty clearly about the concern of, an event taking place in Dartford becoming the de facto path that Ian described. I'd like you to think about our neighborhood, not just in terms of Dartford, but in terms of the 225 houses that make up the Hillcrest plan, which goes from Skinker in the city of St. Louis all the way to Dartford. And it's a coherent neighborhood that we've worked very hard to see as a whole. So what happens in traffic on one street really impacts the attitude and the future of a lot of other property in that area and the expectations of homeowners now and in the future. So I would encourage you to look at us as a whole neighborhood, not just Dartford. Second, I've long thought about Big Bend and what could be done with that. I actually have ancestors who started some of the neighborhoods along that west side. And it's always remained, it's become a speedway, much like Skinker. And I would like to talk to the university more about Skinker and what we could do to tame that, because I think it's a huge quality of life issue, not only for the university, but for Forest Park and these other institutions, Concordia and so on. So we ought to look at Big Bend. I think that's a huge opportunity. It's not just the university's burden to make that work. It seems to me it's a community effort to slow the traffic down, to get it to behave much more responsibly, and to create a real bikeway. We have the TrailNet and everybody else coming out of the woodwork trying to create these safer places. Your own city has done a lot of work on that recently. You can see it all over downtown. I think it is a huge challenge, but I think it is exactly the right way to go. And it has to be this intuitive, organic, obvious pathway that'll do so much to animate and open up that whole side of Fonbonne and even Concordia to some extent. It'll make a major difference. So I'd like to think we can help and really work toward that. The third thing I'll mention is part of the concern is, what is an overlay district? What's in an overlay district? I've been in real estate development. I've done a few of them, so I know, but I don't know what is going to be in this one. And one of the things you might do or consider doing is that, while not getting specific about the terms of each of these categories, you might circulate what would be included, analytically in such a plan. That way people can begin to see with themselves how to answer those questions, how to give you better and more informed feedback, so that we all make the best choices. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Bob Whitman, 35 Aberdeen. So we've talked a little bit about the pedestrian and vehicle access on Demon and Dartford. I'm concerned about smaller vehicle access. I've been on a number of campuses in my career, in school and out of school. And I know that one of the things that proliferates is golf carts that people buy that helps to move their junk around from one part of the campus to another part of campus. And I would encourage the city to think about restricting the use of those through the Dartford and Demon access, because that's going to be something that pops up, I think, for people that don't want to drive down Big Bend every time they want to go from one campus to another. So they're going to say, okay, well, I got 20 grand in my department account. I'm going to buy a golf cart and I'm going to drive that instead. And I don't want to see a bunch of small vehicles that can go through pedestrianized traffic lanes up and down the streets in the neighborhood. Next thing that I'm interested in, we're talking about ball fields. Baseball is frequently played at night, and it's frequently played with public address systems. And if we're going to have probably about 20 home games a year, I don't want to hear them in my front room and in my house every single game, not to mention the practices that are associated with teams. So some thought about noise control. Well, it's not noise, announcement control would be helpful as you all are making the plans for that part of the campus. And then the last thing, if you have late night games, you have late night traffic coming back to where the students sleep. So I know that I've been pretty pumped at the end of a late night game where I was successful walking back and forth through the neighborhood. I've heard, my neighbors that are excited about Greyhound success. That's something to be managed along with the pedestrian access, is they're going to be excited, loud pedestrians. So if you all would, please give that some thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll go online really quick. Shirley Chu has had her hand up for a while, so we're going to allow you to talk here, Shirley.
Yeah, so this is actually Obi Griffith, and Shirley Chu is here as well. Shirley's faculty at University of Missouri, and I'm at WashU Medical Campus. We're at 104 Arundel. So we're one of the houses that really directly back onto this Big Bend overlay district. I think we would definitely echo all of the concerns about traffic down Dartford and going through, that access that's currently sort of bike and pedestrian only, but has like a pylon or whatever that's pretty much permanently preventing cars from going through there. We're also kind of would like to know more about the buffer zone that's depicted that would be directly behind us, like what that might actually constitute. And then we're also wondering about the Concordia housing, which would be very much in our backyard. Like, what are the heights on those? Can they effectively see right into our back room, so to speak, and how is that kind of issue mitigated? So those are kind of our concerns.
Building height.
If you could, please. That way they can hear you on Zoom.
Hello, I'm Angie Esslinger. I'm an architect working with Concordia on this potential development. The housing shown at the central portion of the Concordia campus is actually approximately 370 plus feet away from the north property line. So that on its own should put your mind at ease a slight bit. The largest buildings are 3-story, and those are the 24 unit apartments that Mike addressed earlier. And the top of the ridge of those homes or those apartment buildings is 50 feet. But again, they're 375 feet away from that property line.
Great, thank you. The other question was about the buffers. And so the buffers will be a part of the overlay district as it's designed. So what that exact dimension is at this point in time is unknown, but that is something we'll share with everyone as it's drafted.
And we could have Tom Kirk add any specifics if we want to go into more depth than that on the buffer zone.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for giving us this opportunity to ask questions and share our feedback. I'm Susan Furdak and I live at 7 Dartford Avenue. And I've got a couple questions. I guess moving to Clayton about 6 years ago, I never thought there'd be potential for property value to go down, but I worry about that for us on Dartford. So to me, that's very real. I don't know if anybody else feels like that here, but I think it's a real concern. So I guess I'm hoping that our feedback will be heard and that the plan will reflect these concerns. One concern is I know we moved from U City to Clayton, and I know there are a lot of issues in Ames Place and Parkview with crime and, disturbances too, just because they're college kids going in and out and back and forth. And so there's maybe crimes of opportunity, but then there are also very dangerous crimes as well that took place. And I just don't want to see that happen, obviously, in our neighborhood either. And that's also a very real concern. I guess, again, echoing, I really do want Dartford, at the dead end, to be closed to any real traffic. And I guess, I know we've talked about, or others have talked about the idea of being more open but I personally like the fence around South 40 along Wydown, because I do not want, if it's not there, traffic will go the easiest way, and that will be right down Dartford. So I think it's critical for that to remain a fence to keep the traffic out. I'm also concerned about, of course, that 15 to 20-foot buffer. I realize that's the current buffer, but there's nothing built there. So now WashU has the opportunity potentially to build a lot there. And so what is that going to be? A 15-foot buffer to a building or a field is nothing. And I would like reassurance that that's not going to happen. We need more than 15 feet, trust me. That's not enough, nowhere near enough. And then I'm also wondering, will there be like a new light, a traffic light on Big Bend to enter into that, wherever that is? And will that connect with like Oak Knoll? Because there's always a backup of traffic there. Is that, I mean, is that anywhere? Will there be a light? Because otherwise there's going to be such a huge backup of traffic anytime there's some game or something going on those fields.
It's unknown what will happen on Big Bend just yet. We do have our first meeting with St. Louis County to discuss Big Bend this week. So that is a St. Louis County route. So anything that happens on Big Bend is really in their purview. So we plan on working with them, sharing these plans with them, sharing these concerns, talking about traffic patterns, and we'll see where that conversation goes. But the very first communication with them will occur on Wednesday. So more to come on that.
I mean, I guess I hope there will be. And I think that would help if there's any, it helps slow down traffic as well.
Well, and normally we wouldn't go see them until we had a site plan, right? And we had taken a site plan into the city of Clayton. And then at that point, the city of Clayton would then trigger this county traffic review. So the city was good enough to get the county engineers to sit down with us now to give us their feedback and ideas so that we can answer your questions, because we're befuddled by Big Bend too. The idea of a traffic light, traffic calming, another lane, I don't know, but somebody who knows what they're doing needs to start looking at this and give us also feedback.
Definitely. I also wonder from both of you, WashU and Travers, if you can give some guess, is there some plan of what would be built or whatever in the space that's closest to the Dartford dead end?
This works. I think that I don't think that we can say really clearly right now what would go up against that buffer. I think holistically, these overlays enable some development which move the fields off of the South 40, and that gives some space to future more holistic development of the South 40. I think thinking long-term about what buildings go where is several more steps down the road.
The theme, though, is a little bit like what Mike from Concordia described to you as far as trying to create a bit of a better sense of community. And the theme is to move the center of activity up further to the north to connect better with
The north, which is toward Dartford.
No, to the north, which is up at Forsyth.
The Big Bend side.
Oh, you're talking that one. All right.
About the Big Bend side and where that.
Yeah, I'm
the
sorry. I'm
fence
not
might-
talking about South 40.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was talking about where Dartford dead ends.
Oh, yeah,
into the
then there-
new space.
Yeah.
No ideas what will happen. there.
No, what you just heard was the only directional feedback I can give you on either of these overlays. Other than I hear all of you on Dartford.
We want distance, definitely. And obviously, as people have said, control of noise and light, and most clearly traffic. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Let's go online. Joshua. Has a
Yeah,
hand up.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name's Josh Safe. I live at 108 Arundel Place. So I live next door to Obi, and I'm neighbors with Susan and David and many others who have spoken. You know, I'd like to just amplify what David said and what Susan just brought up about the buffer zone. I mean, I'm looking out my back window. There's a lot of very old, tall trees, and it seems like 15 feet is what it is existing. And that's basically a little alleyway, essentially, to what, as Susan mentioned, is completely unbuilt. So I think we need more space than that to really get comfortable, particularly in light of the fact that it's unbuilt now. And I got to be honest, it seems premature. I understand that WashU has an issue with respect to, housing issues and needing to relocate the fields to create that sense of community and to accommodate the housing. But it seems premature until there's actually a plan to say, trust us, right? I gotta, okay, but like, what's it gonna be? Why should we be talking about this until there's an actual plan? It just seems a little bit premature, to be honest with you, particularly until we can get some of these assurances with respect to noise, with respect to light, et cetera. The other thing I want to bring up is, these projects obviously won't be done overnight. So during the construction phase, setting aside the long-term vehicular restrictions on Dartford, can we get a commitment that there will be no construction vehicles for the next 2 years that are going to be coming up and down, even if that's not a permanent fixture once it's done, because that's a quality of life issue for a meaningful period of time for us to live right here.
Tom, do you want to go into any more conversation at all about what you know about the buffer zone?
No, I would only say we actually showed 20-foot buffers just as a placeholder. So we're already anticipating more than 15. So I think that's the whole point of these conversations, is just to sort of talk about, we talked about the box and sort of how it can develop. And the way to develop it with you all is sort of to think about, these movable lines and sort of where it feels good. So I think it's just, we'll have to keep having the conversation, but I kind of agree with Mary. I think, we're hearing everyone loud and clear on the whole Dartford, not just the access, but also sort of someone used the word distance. I think really helpful commentary.
And it's also a buffer.
Barry,
It's not just, empty space, right? We could talk landscaping, fencing, all sorts of things that make an attractive buffer.
yeah, I would just say, that's fine. The buffer zone is essentially about 200 feet right now because there's nothing. So, 20 feet. Yeah. And you can't replace, 100-year-old trees with landscaping. So, I think it is a really, really non-trivial discussion we need to have, because 20 feet sounds great until you come look at it and there's nothing. So it's going to be right on top of us relative to what we've been used to.
Great, thank you.
And what about, just in terms of the access during the construction, could you comment on that?
I think it's incredibly premature to talk about that since we don't have a project. But I do know that when we do have a project, we do discuss anything we're doing with the city and the neighborhood. And I can't imagine this concern is going to go away. So that would be, the time to elicit that commitment from the group in the university that's planning any construction. That's certainly something that the university has done and considered for prior projects in our service area.
I agree. It is. I'd ask you to be reciprocal. I agree. It is extremely premature, but to ask us to approve it before we have a plan seems equally unfair.
I take that point. Let us stew on that one. I think let's stew on that one. Let's take that as a comment. All right. I take your point.
Thank you.
So Dave Furdeck, Dartford. So I got some concerns when I was listening about the overlay district ruling? And why not go to conditional zoning? Because it sounded like there might be a multi-stage approach, and if I thought I understood you correctly, in an overlay district, we're going to grant the access and say, here's the conditions. Now, so long as you guys don't violate these conditions, you can build in multi-stages. And so why would we as a city want to grant that as an overlay district and not a conditional zoning on a plan by plan basis? So that's one of the concerns I'd like the city to address. And I think that suits the neighborhood much better than a district in that space.
So the idea again is this is going to take place over a long period of time. So the idea is if you build this box properly, so if you have the sizable buffers that everybody would require there, if you have building heights that are acceptable within that box, if you have controlled access points within that box, you have lighting standards, noise standards, if you're already laying out the regulations and everybody knows what those rules are, we feel that that's an advantageous approach versus every time there's an application over a series of years going through the conditional use process, which is as you go through it, I mean, there's it's very fluid. You don't know what those standards really are going in. You've got some basic R2 single family residential zoning standards, but then everything else is kind of this open negotiation between the neighborhoods and the cities and the universities. The idea is lay out all the rules in advance and work together, everybody, to figure out what those rules are and find what's acceptable. And then as long as you get that box correct, and you know that the heights aren't going to be egregious, that the lights aren't going to be too bright, it makes it predictable. You know what will be built within that area. So you don't have that need to negotiate everything that happens.
Well, this is a 80-year plan. I guess my understanding was this was a 80-year something in that. I wasn't at the first meeting. And so I just think that tends to benefit WashU more than it does the neighborhood. Okay, that's my comment for you all to consider acting on behalf of the citizens.
Okay.
So thank you.
No point taken. And again, this is it's a planning process, just like for the city right now, we're about to start a comprehensive planning process. And so we can decide in advance as we develop, this is how we want to develop. This is what we want to put where, and this is what it should look like. Instead of every time an application comes in, we look at it and try to figure out whether or not that's acceptable.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
I'm all for a master plan, but I think that like I said, again, I think I'd like the city to consider conditional zoning instead of just the overlay district. Because 80 years, a lot of things get forgotten over that period of time so anyway, that's my concern.
Okay, thank you. All right, Pauline. Got you ready
Yeah.
to talk here? There you go.
Yeah, hi, this is Pauline Kim, also a WashU employee, and I live at 97 Arundel. I want to first just echo some of the comments made by the neighbors in terms of Dartford access and also the importance of that buffer. But want to add one point that I don't think has really been mentioned, which is it's not just the 100-year-old trees, it's also there's a hill there, and particularly when you're thinking about lights and noise, that may mean there needs to be, like even more than sort of what you might ordinarily think of as an adequate buffer there. So that's one comment. And then I had a question about the bicycle circulation shown along Big Bend. I'm not sure what that means or what that looks like or how it is that bicyclists would be incentivized to go that route rather than what's probably a far more attractive bicycling route, which is down University through the neighborhood and down Dartford.
Today, there's no incentive for a biker to go down Big Bend. And every incentive to go down Dartford, which would be much more attractive and much safer. But the point is there a way we WashU as part of, any of these infrastructure improvements could work with you all and work with the city to improve that situation? The Big Bend sidewalk is narrow it's just not even that great for walking on that stretch. Perhaps it could be re-envisioned as a, wider, more attractive, separated biking and, pedestrian walkway for better for, carriages, baby carriages and people with tricycles and people walking their dog. It's just not great right now. So that is a strategy to help improve, both improve Big Bend, but also to try and change behavior.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Next, we have Jerry Louder.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all my fellow neighbors in the area who have spoke up already. I live at 110 Arundel, which is right on the corner of Arundel and Dartford. So definitely would like to echo the comments that other folks have made. And I think while it's been touched on both with the Wydown access for the South 40 overlay district, as well as along Dartford and within the neighborhood, having a middle school, elementary school where our kids are walking or riding their bikes to school, I think it's really imperative that excess vehicular traffic is limited, prohibited, inhibited, whatever needs to be done to minimize the impact on that. But another thing, so just like with, Josh mentioned, my house backs up to the to Concordia. And, there's a significant variation, just like the last person mentioned, variation in the topography. And there's, a significant decrease in the grade down to where the current, I guess, older single family homes are there. And I think what I could imagine is that if that area is going to be developed into baseball fields, et cetera, it's going to have to be brought up to the level of the upper field that already exists. And both for the buffer zone, but also the idea of eventually looking at a large retaining wall that if that area has to be backfilled to do that is, something I think that needs to be considered, as well as just the overall impact of the topography of the existing area. So I know that there's not a plan laid out, but looking at that variation in the topography, has there been any thought about what's going to be done in that area? Would there be significant backfill to level it up to the upper playing field?
We have not gotten that far yet, other than to acknowledge you're absolutely right. It's a very challenging topography and not just in that corner. So we're going to need engineers to really take a hard look at it. And like I said, we just have not started that yet, but everything you said is spot on.
Thank you.
All right, we're just about at time here. We do have one more hand up online. That's Tracy. If you can unmute yourself.
Yep. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I have two monitors on here. So my wife and I live at 1 Dartford, which is literally the southernmost home on Dartford. So obviously you've heard from a lot of my neighbors who live right around the area, and I won't repeat all that, but for our neighborhood and for the area where Dartford joins with Concordia, any increase in vehicular traffic, either through construction or later through just personal vehicular, will create a significant nuisance with respect to this area, the overlay, and just our quality of life. So it's very important, I think, to all of us, as you've heard, that for Dartford and for the area around it, Arundel, that traffic not be increased in any way through either the construction or through the use of this overlay. It just in terms of the buffer at present where our house is, we probably have about 2 acres of century-old trees next to our home, with, again, the topography of it being more of a hill. So there's going to be a challenge to WashU to create anything that effectively impacts that in terms of our use and enjoyment of our property, specifically with it butting up to it. But I think many of our neighbors have the same quality of life issues, so it's a very significant concern to all of us.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate the feedback. That is all the hands up that are online. Is there anyone in the room with one last comment? Got time for maybe one more question or comment here. Sure.
So thinking about the last question and the number of people that have mentioned the trees, that bubble at the northeast corner is recognizing the trees that are there and the note existing planted areas to remain is meant to acknowledge that. And I guess as we talk, think about the 15 feet, in that corner, what this is proposing really is 15 feet plus the existing. The bubble of the trees that are there now. Yeah.
Yeah, this might be useful just because there's, certainly we're acknowledging that, and in the other corner too, that there's just, existing, as you say, 100-year-old trees and buffer that, is going to remain and going to be planned around.
Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, I want to thank you all for coming and attending online. Again, this has been a recorded session, so we'll add this to engageclayton.com. That's going to be the clearinghouse for all the information. So if you haven't signed up for notifications yet, please do so. And as we have further public meetings, we'll plan to use the same notifications we did previously. I'm not sure if we'll go a letter to every address. We'll talk about how we're going to do that. Hopefully you notice the signs in the neighborhoods now with QR codes that drive you to engageclayton.com. We want to use that for everything. So please sign up there and leave comments. If you want to send anything to any of us at the city, as far as feedback, we welcome that and we will incorporate it all. So thanks again for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you.